The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Another black woman found dead in police custody. This makes 3 in 2 weeks. I'm talking about 37-year-old black woman Ralkina Jones, who was found dead in her jail cell in Cleveland Heights City Jail over the weekend. Police accused her of striking her ex-husband in the arm with a tire iron outside of a Save-A-Lot food store. She then hopped into a car and allegedly came a few feet away from running over her ex and his friend with her 11-year-old daughter in the back seat. So police arrested her, and then her ex-spouse decided not to press charges against her. The Cuyahoga County medical examiner performed a preliminary autopsy and said the woman had suffered no suspicious injuries, but a full report has not yet been released. In a statement, officials said the woman was observed by medical professionals 3 times from Saturday evening into Sunday morning. At 7:15 p.m. Saturday night, officers noticed that she appeared a little sluggish, and they phoned Cleveland Heights Fire Department. At 10:40, little over 3 hours later, she was released back to the jail after an evaluation at a local hospital. And then at 12:45 a.m., just 45 minutes into Sunday, she was checked. Her vital signs appeared normal. Just 7 hours later, 7:30 a.m., she was found unresponsive on her bed. The woman's sister, Renee Ashford, told Cleveland.com that her sister was absolutely fine when they spoke to her on Saturday. Quote, "She didn't complain of nothing, saying she was hurting or anything." So there's a couple layers to this. Crisis number one is a third black woman dies in police custody in less than 2 weeks. The bigger crisis is that 2 people per day are dying in police custody. According to USA Today, over 2,000 people died in police custody in the U.S. in just 3 years. This is about 2 per day. Now, when we look at the data, when we look at just the chance that any person will die, and then you look at the number of people that have died in police custody as a percentage of all of those in police custody, the numbers aren't particularly alarming, but you have to consider that we need to explore why it's not happening slightly less in police custody. In other words, not all of these deaths are natural deaths, deaths of natural causes. So as such, we have to figure out, why is it that in police custody, there's essentially no difference in how likely people are to die, even when you include these sort of non-natural ways that people sometimes die?
Yeah, other than some strange medical situation where this might have happened anyway, it's really something that, I don't think I need to tell this to everyone, but shouldn't be happening at all, right? I mean, this is 100% avoidable.
Many of these cases are. So in this particular one, we don't yet know. She seemed fine, was checked out medically Saturday night, Sunday morning, unresponsive and dead. So we definitely need to look at that. I want to put aside for a second, though, the sort of deliberate bad acts by police. We know that sometimes these happen. Sometimes there are specific bad acts by police. Let's put that aside. The broad issue for me is that we clearly have a situation where most police, many police, too many police, are not properly trained to deal with mental health issues. In Northampton, Massachusetts, where our program started, police are far better trained on this, more social worker type skills, more non-traditionally law enforcement type intervention skills. It is far from a perfect department, Lewis, but they do have training, at least some training, in many skills that too many police departments don't really have. Many of them just don't have the right skills to approach situations with ideas and strategies and resources that go beyond sort of the traditional, stereotypical law enforcement behaviors.
Right. I mean, we could start a very long discussion about this, about funding and about how, different police departments have their priorities. It's a complicated issue.
No question about it. And we're going to continue following these particular stories and the broader issue of police having some more training in terms of sort of emotional and psychological support that may stem from a 911 call, but really shouldn't be handled with tasers and guns and handcuffs in many cases. Hey, I don't know if you've been following what's going on with Mike Huckabee. Mike Huckabee, of course, the 2016 Republican presidential candidate. He's a former Arkansas governor. He is a Christian pastor. He recently linked the Iran nuclear deal to killing Jews in the Holocaust, talking about the deal being like marching Jews to the ovens. And now he has come out and in the midst of all the blowback, said that most Jews are supportive of his comments. This is what he had to say to Matt Lauer on NBC. Let's take a look at the video.
Governor Mike Huckabee joins us now. Governor, good to see you. Good morning.
Thank you, Matt. Great to be here.
It seems to me the irony here is you're taking a pro-Israel stance, but in explaining that stance, you have offended people in Israel and Jews all around the world.
Hardly.
Hardly. Yeah, heartily. Yeah. The Israeli ambassador to the United States calls your words inappropriate. Some fellow Republicans have called them offensive and outrageous, and the Anti-Defamation League spokesperson called them completely out of line and unacceptable, and you're not backing down an inch.
Not at all. In fact, the response from Jewish people has been overwhelmingly positive. The response from Holocaust survivors, from the children of Holocaust survivors. I was last night in an event. I was probably one of 4 Gentiles in the entire event. It was a Jewish event. People were overwhelmingly supportive.
But
and Matt, here's why.
This guy's dangerously nuts. I mean, the wheels are spinning, Lewis, but the hamster is dead, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. He seems to be out of his mind. Is he completely delusional? Or maybe was there like 1 or 2 Jews who actually said, yeah, you know what, Mike, you're right.
Well, I haven't met a single Jew that thinks Mike Huckabee's comments are even remotely reasonable. Maybe some of his best friends are Jewish, as we often hear from these types of people. And maybe those couple of friends did say something positive about it. But Daniel Kurtzer, who was the U.S. ambassador to Israel for 4 years under President George W. Bush, said Monday that Republican presidential candidate Mike Huckabee's use of the Holocaust imagery to attack President Obama was reminiscent of the rhetoric that led to the assassination of former Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995. I was actually in Rabin Square, where Yitzhak Rabin was killed, when I was in Israel just last week. And it is a very interesting analogy because we are talking about incitement in a very particular way. And this former ambassador, Daniel Kurtzer, certainly no liberal loon, Lewis, and very accurately and poignantly and precisely saying what Mike Huckabee is saying is absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that it is just an attack on Obama. I know that there are plenty of people on both sides of the political spectrum and plenty of Jews that have fears about this deal, but you got to exercise some restraint here when you're addressing it, right?
You can critique specific provisions in the deal without having to jump to Holocaust imagery, and that's really where I think Huckabee goes way wrong. And for me, he's throwing red meat out there at the very bizarre right-wing supporters of Israel, often for very evangelical Christian reasons, that they think by supporting Israel, Jesus will come back. This is a group that I saw some members of when I was in Israel last week, and they really creep me out.
Yeah, well, if you want to get noticed, I think you probably need to say things like this because he was kind of slipping away, right, in Trump's shadow.
Yeah, this is certainly, bringing up the Holocaust is a pretty good way to get people to pay attention to you, especially when it's so heinously offensive. Speaking of Donald Trump, the day after Donald Trump visited the border with Mexico in Laredo, Texas, he had all sorts of new claims about immigration, including about how many undocumented immigrants are actually here. On Friday, Donald Trump did an interview on MSNBC's Morning Joe where he said, I don't think the 11 million, which is a number you've been hearing for many years, I've been hearing that number for 5 years, I don't think that's an accurate number anymore, Trump said. I'm now hearing it's 30 million, it could be 34 million, which is a much bigger problem. So host Joe Scarborough, no liberal, said to Donald Trump, well, who are you hearing that number from? Trump replied, I'm hearing it from other people, and I have seen it in various newspapers. The truth is, the government has no idea how many illegals are here. So PolitiFact looked into this, completely made up. The most recent estimate from the Department of Homeland Security is 11.4 million unauthorized immigrants as of 2012. This includes those who entered the U.S. illegally and people who have just overstayed their visas. And there's a bunch of other independent organizations that have very similar numbers. The Pew Research Center, which follows Undocumented Immigration has it at 11.3 million. The Center for Migration Studies has it at 11 million. The Center for Immigration Studies has it at 11 to 12 million. So all of these figures are derived in the same way, which is subtracting known legal immigrants from the total number of foreign-born people documented in the U.S. Census, and then making an adjustment for the fact that we know many unauthorized immigrants would not participate in the census at all. So this is very, very simple. All experts saying Donald Trump is talking out of his you-know-what. It's just lying, it's fear-mongering, and the xenophobes love it, and the polls confirm that.
Yep, I think he is saying exactly what many Americans want to hear. And I don't think we've really heard what he plans to do about all of these illegals. Do you think he would have even more support if he said he wanted to execute all of them?
And Louis, I assume you saying all of these illegals to quote Trump, as we know, I just want to make sure the audience knows, we don't say these illegals, but quoting Trump. I want to before we get 100 emails saying Louis has gone off the rails. Whenever I hear Donald Trump saying something like this, and you're right, he has stopped short of saying we should kill illegals, but I know that there would be some people who agree with certainly shooting them at the border. We've heard that many times before. I feel like saying to Donald Trump, listen, Donald, we can explain it to you, but we can't understand it for you. And that's where we seem to be having a roadblock with Trump.
Yeah, I'm really hoped that he is asked specifics during these debates and that, I think this is going to be huge.
Well, there's a lesson here, which is that Trump used that classic Fox News technique of Fox saying, hey, some people say, right? Donald Trump was asked, well, who told you that? And he said, oh, some people have said it to me. I sometimes do this, and I really try hard to avoid it. I usually do it in a slightly different way. So I might say, some people say tax cuts for the rich stimulate the economy. And I'm not naming anyone specifically, but that's a general idea we know exists. I'm not saying some people told me there are 30 million illegal immigrants. There is a difference, but I'm very proactive, Louis, in trying to avoid that weasel language.
Yeah, some better language would be some experts say, or some studies suggest.
And it's even better to cite them specifically, obviously.
Of course, yes, but not always easy to do.
No surprise, Donald Trump using the same type of weasel language as Fox News, and in this case, it has been deemed completely pants-on-fire false by PolitiFact. Send me your thoughts about all of this. DavidPakman.com. You can click contact us and email us, or discuss it on Reddit, DavidPakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT. Back after the break with much, much more.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Remember that if you ever shop at Amazon.com, the shopping you do can support the work we do if you first go to our website, davidpakman.com, and click on the Amazon banner on the right side of the page. Bookmark the link, use it whenever you shop. You can also become a David Pakman Show member at davidpakman.com/membership. Today's new member of the day is Anthony Alvarado. Thank you, Anthony, for being a David Pakman Show member. You can join Anthony. We're talking about 10 or 15 cents a day for membership. Support the work we're doing and get some great perks. davidpakman.com/membership. It has been 3 weeks since the last Hatriot Mail because of our vacation. Let me not delay any further before telling you what I'm talking about when I talk about Hatriot Mail.
It's like email forwards from your racist grandma on steroids. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
So let's get ourselves back into Hatriot Mail after the vacation. This isn't, my sort of preview is, this is a Hatriot Mail that escalates very quickly. I won't explain more. You'll know what I mean. I'm confident.
You got your panties in a knot, David? Is that what's wrong with you? Your dad just let you be gay? You're wrong, David, when you say people are born gay. David Pakman fans are faggots.
So, Lewis, a very quick explanation. First, yeah, the typical attempts to use sort of emasculating language. I have my panties in a knot, and my dad allowed me to be gay. Then saying I'm just wrong when I say people are born gay, which is, a common sort of story that we hear from many on the anti-gay right. And then very quickly, Lewis, taking it up a notch, saying all David Pakman fans are faggots.
Yeah, well, I think you got to end with a bang. You got to make an impression. So I love this one. I think this is a perfect Hatriot Mail.
We still have Hatriot Mail perks available. We ended our $50,000 fundraising campaign last week, but because we reached that $50,000 goal, we're allowed to keep the campaign open for about 3 weeks past the end date, and all of the perks are still available. You can get those last contributions in at davidpakman.com/donate. That's Hatriot Mail this week. We'll have another one next week. We actually have the vacation itself brought on a crazy amount of Hatriot Mail. The same people who apparently hate our show, Lewis, were just furious that we had the audacity not to produce the show for 10 days while we were on vacation. So we have like a whole new batch of Hatriot Mail getting ready for you.
Yeah, well, we needed to provide more material to hate on. And so we have to work for them to do that.
Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker is a Republican. He is also a destroyer of jobs and local economies. And he also seems to have no idea how to do a proper campaign stop for cheesesteaks. He did a cheesesteak stop, and his campaign stop went horribly, horribly wrong. He learned this the hard way when he went to Philadelphia, and he decided to go to 2 of the popular cheesesteak spots. He cut in line, angering just about everybody who was there, only ate half of his cheesesteak, left his trash on the table for others to clean up, and apparently this is a big violation. He ordered the cheesesteaks without onions and with American cheese, according to Philly.com. I didn't know, Lewis, that was such a big thing. I guess you're supposed to have it with onions. That part I knew. But I didn't know that the Cheese Whiz instead of American cheese was such a big thing with cheesesteaks.
Yeah, here, that's, here you do it the way they do it. And you order it the traditional way. And he probably lost some votes because of this.
Maybe so. He went to both Pat's King of Steaks and Gino's Steaks, and both very well-known establishments in Philadelphia. Protesters were waiting for him, some with hilarious signs. There was one guy holding a huge, huge sign that said Scott Walker smells his own poop right outside of the cheesesteak spot. So it was an abortive campaign stop from the get-go, and people very angry over his choice of sandwich, and then leaving part of it there. I get the strategy of having a photo op at these types of places, right? These popular attractions, enjoying the local cuisine, but I don't really get why he went to 2 different cheesesteak spots for 2 different meals in the same afternoon. Doesn't that just emphasize that the entire thing is phony? Most people don't have 2 lunches within an hour of each other.
That is true. But here there are 2 famous cheesesteak joints right next to each other.
So maybe you were comparing or something.
Perhaps. But we always see candidates messing up these campaign stops. They're supposed to be great photo ops, and they fail to realize that it doesn't just end with the pictures. People are going to hear firsthand information of all the stupid stuff you did. We have the internet. It's a thing.
And the Twitter was a buzz. Twitter was a flitter. I don't even know what to call it, about the leaving the trash behind and the cutting everybody in line. And I'll be honest, for me, the American cheese thing, I don't really like American cheese. It's not even really a thing. It's a sort of cheese-like product. But I would have asked for provolone instead of the Cheese Whiz. I think provolone goes pretty well with a steak and onions.
Well, I think you learned something important here. Just don't do that in Philly.
Right.
Right?
A Texas teacher is sick of black people. I know, it sounds like a crazy headline. She's just sick of them, Lewis, and she's calling for segregation. She denies being racist, though. I don't know, no word whether she has lots of black friends. But I will tell you the story. A 4th grade teacher. That I have black friends thing, Lewis. It gets me every time.
It's classic. Yeah, I think the only way I'd be shocked here is if we discovered that she had a black husband or something like that.
Karen Fitzgibbons is a fourth grade teacher in a Texas elementary school. She posted to Facebook that black people are to blame for racial tensions. She wants to bring back state-sanctioned segregation, and she says she is just sick of black people causing trouble. Quote, "I'm almost to the point of wanting them all segregated on one side of town so that they can hurt each other and leave the innocent people alone. Maybe the 50s and 60s were really onto something." I don't know if this teacher is aware, but we have systemic segregation in many cities already. I mean, it doesn't even have to be sort of state enforced because we already have this type of de facto segregation. We see it in many parts of New York City. We see it in many parts of Boston. This exists already.
It does. Well, not in the area of Texas that she's living in, and I almost applaud her for saying it, but denying that you're racist. I mean, come on, just admit that you're racist.
Yeah, enough. I already have enough respect for her because she was willing to just say she's sick of black people. I wish I heard this from more racists who try to just say, oh, let's focus on urban single parent, like all the code words for she's just coming out and saying it. She is sick of black people and she wants them segregated. I wish she would just also admit she's racist and just say, yeah, I'm racist. I don't like black people. I don't like them because they're black. And I want the state to keep them on a different side of town.
Now, what if she just doesn't like black children? What if after they reach a certain age, she's totally fine and indifferent to them?
Black
is that
adults.
still racism?
So what you're saying, Lewis, is maybe black adults she's fine with.
Yeah. What if that's the case? Is that still racism?
Yeah, I think it probably is. There's not too many situations where saying, I don't hate all black people, just black children, qualifies as not being racist. She is maybe getting what she hoped for, at least in part, because within just a few days of her posting this, she deleted the comment on Facebook, but the screenshots of it are completely all over the place. She apologized, saying she's ashamed of the post, and her school, her employer, has launched an investigation. How can anyone believe that someone who says this type of stuff is competent enough to be teaching our 9-year-olds?
And what kind of investigation needs to be done? I think the decision here is pretty simple. If she is not terminated, well, I guess that means there's lots of racism in the school department or, in that, I don't know, city, whatever.
This really brings up some great questions of nature versus nurture, right? Did someone teach this woman to be this insanely racist and vile? Or did she come up with some of this stuff all on her own behalf?
I don't know. It could be a combination of the two. It doesn't have to be one or the other, right?
It certainly could be a combination. In fact, as with most things, it is a combination of both nature and nurture. So the entire context of this is she was really upset of the criticism of police for that story in McKinley, Texas, where a police officer resigned after starting to assault black teenagers at a pool party. If you're coming out angrily in favor of the police officers in that case, that tells us a lot about your state of mind, too.
I think so, yeah. And we saw the video from that incident. It was pretty clear what was going on there.
All right, after the break, we're going to talk to international relations expert Philippe Assouline. We have reports from Gaza in Israel that increasingly there are ISIS-aligned individuals within Gaza. How is this going to impact the Hamas control of Gaza? And more broadly, we'll talk about what Hamas control of Gaza, in contrast to Palestinian Authority governance in the West Bank, how that may impact the possibilities for peace going forward. A conversation I'm very much looking forward to having after the break with Philippe Assouline.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by international relations expert Philippe Assouline. Philippe, it's great to talk to you as always. We've had now the sort of coming together of two separate Middle East issues. One is that of ISIS, and the other is that of Hamas control in Gaza. Of course, the West Bank in Israel under the control of the Palestinian Authority, but Hamas in control in Gaza. Talk to us first a little bit about the logistics. When we read that ISIS is increasingly in Gaza, what does that mean?
So it's a very good question. So first of all, thank you for having me again. It's always a pleasure to be on your show. So ISIS being in Gaza doesn't exactly mean ISIS and al-Baghdadi, or the Central Command in Iraq and Syria, are controlling what's happening in Gaza. It's important to understand, without wanting to complicate the issues too much, that Palestinian politics are riven by clan and faction loyalties. And in Gaza now, because Hamas is short of money, because it has not really achieved much in terms of war with Israel, etc., there's some clans that are starting to assert themselves and challenge Hamas's rule in Gaza. The way they're doing that is tapping into ideology. The society now is becoming more and more Islamist, ironically under the influence of Hamas. And so they're using Salafist ideology, which is to implement the caliphate not later, but now. And there's some kind of echo of loyalty to ISIS, but it's not exactly a direct organizational link. It's more of like an organic thing where these clans are using what they can to justify their grab for power.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the Salafists have been in Gaza for a long time. That's not new, but the sort of decision by some to ally with ISIS or represent the ISIS message, that's what's new.
Right. So the Salafists have been in Gaza and in the Sinai for quite some time. I think if there's a new element, it's their aggressive moves in the Sinai against the Egyptian army. And Hamas is actually cooperating with the Salafists, or ISIS, more closely associated with ISIS in the Sinai, which is at the border of Gaza, so as to ensure the tunnels. And in Gaza, they're fighting each other. The allegiance to ISIS, exactly as you're pointing out, is part of this new trend of these groups around the world who want to either ennoble themselves or legitimize themselves or be part of whatever is, has a bit of celebrity, unfortunately. And that's why they claim connection to ISIS. I don't think there's any tight organizational link now, more so in the Sinai, actually. There might be some actual connections in the Sinai, but not as much in Gaza for now.
Increasingly, there's this very interesting, I don't really like calling it a test case because it sounds like you're running experiments, but there's a sort of de facto test case happening now in the West Bank and in Gaza, whereas the West Bank is under Palestinian Authority control longer and longer, and Gaza is under the control of Hamas, and now we have these ISIS-aligned Salafists. We're seeing that the Israeli relationship to, quote, Palestinians broadly speaking, actually does differ based on what is going on the ground, because we see that the interactions with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank now are very different than what's going on in Gaza. And it's sort of evidence we can point to say, actually, what is possible with Palestinians really does vary depending on who's in charge.
Yeah, the leadership definitely is a huge element. There's a schism among Palestinians now that's remarkable. The Israeli government, for right or wrong, has decided that the Palestinian society does not really support Abbas. So Abbas now is running the West Bank with the support, massive support from America and Israeli security forces. And the idea is if they remove themselves, he will be toppled by Islamists the next day. I don't know if I agree with that, but there's definitely a completely different climate in the West Bank, which is now generally peaceful. I mean, there's always terror attacks and violence. Hamas is trying to instigate things. But generally, the West Bank is doing much better. Since Defensive Shield, the operation against terrorism in 2002, there's been a remarkable change. Real estate has gone up. The economy is getting better. Compare that to Gaza, where you have high unemployment, where you have an Islamist group in power, where there's war every few years. It's almost if you're dealing with two completely separate entities. And Hamas won't let the PA back in. The discussion in Israel now is, should Israel have removed Hamas? Should it remove Hamas with the help of Egypt and put the PA? Or should it keep Hamas because if it removes it, ISIS is what is going to take control?
Well, I think there's another, Philippe, if I can, I think there's another sort of consideration. And when I was in Israel last week, I talked to both Jewish Israelis and Arab Israelis about this. The consensus in Israel seems to be that any time that Israel wants to remove Hamas from power in the Gaza Strip, that they would be able to do it. And the speculation from both Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis that I spoke to was, if Israel chooses to do that, they no longer have any reason to explain why they continue without conceding certain elements that other groups may want them to concede, and that they would have no real reason not to have more earnest and open negotiations, and that it sort of may serve as a way for the current right-wing government of Israel, which you and I have criticized before, to avoid having to make those concessions.
I think that's a fair criticism. Personally, I think it has value, but it's part of this debate I was pointing to. A lot of people in Israel think that if you remove Hamas, what you'll get is not the PA, what you'll get is ISIS. Another part of the population, I think a substantial one, thinks that if you remove Hamas, which you could with the help of Egypt, you could put in the PA and have a stable running government and then have negotiations. And that Bibi Netanyahu prefers to have the Palestinians split because it spares him the pressure of having to negotiate with a partner he doesn't trust. Now everything's in flux. The Hamas movement is starting to move away from Iran, apparently, closer to the Saudis. Abbas is talking about his retirement soon. So I don't expect anything to happen in the next few weeks or months. But I think you're absolutely right. A substantial part of the population in Israel thinks this is a cop-out. It's a way to leave the Palestinians divided and not put pressure on Israel. However, that said, I'm always wary of arguments that put the entire onus on Israel. The Palestinian Authority has also the responsibility to unify itself to be a viable negotiating partner. I don't think Israel should necessarily bear the entire responsibility for unifying them.
No, I completely agree. Although when we do think about what's happened in practice, we've seen, we've seen Hamas fight the Palestinian Authority, including very violently. And you could argue it would. I guess what I'm saying is, if you, as the Palestinian Authority, were to say, "Listen, look at what they did to us," you could make a pretty strong argument that it would be tough for them to really exert any influence or power there.
You mean for the PA to exert power?
Exactly.
Yeah. Listen, it's a recurring argument. The legitimacy of the PA is a very real question. It's something that people have grappled with since the beginning of Oslo, which ties into what I think is an extremely important element of this and an extremely important process going on now. A lot of people watching what ISIS is doing, watching what Islamism is doing in the Middle East, are starting to reassess ideologically. I think, unfortunately, it's happening slower in the Palestinian territories, at least in Gaza. But it has to be part of the equation. You can't not impose, as important as leaders are, as you rightly pointed out, I don't think you can impose peace if the people are not there yet. And part of the process has to happen organically by looking at these failed Islamist experiments, as it's happened in Egypt to a large extent, as it's happened in other places in the Middle East. And that would contribute to the legitimacy of the PA. But the current leadership of the PA is old, it's considered corrupt, it's considered to be a kleptocracy. That's also a very real problem, right? Hamas got elected because of its ideology, but also because it was seen as less corrupt than the PA.
You talked a little bit about this or alluded to it, but is there some way in which this ISIS potentially versus Hamas in Gaza could lead to something positive in terms of renewing real negotiations, broadly speaking, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
It depends how much of a grassroots support it has. Like I said, this is based on clan loyalties, clan affiliations, clan struggles. If it's two of the largest families, for example, that were to support the Salafists, you'd have a very hard time changing the opinion of people. If it's some fringe element and it brings suffering to the people and they see what's going on in the Middle East, you could start to have a change. So it really depends on how much of a grassroots support you have for this. It depends on what's happening around. It depends on how Egypt plays into this. There's a whole world of Arab politics internally that we tend to ignore here that would contribute to it. That said, I think Israel could make some moves now to help the situation. But Abbas, I'm not sure that he is the best candidate for Israel to do that with. And he's going to retire soon, so maybe we'll see some positive change.
There's no question there will be a lot to follow as that takes place and as we continue to follow these movements in Gaza. Let me remind everybody, we've been speaking with Philippe Assouline, international relations expert. Always great to have you on.
Always great to be on. Thank you very much.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our buddy Pat Robertson from the 700 Club once asked God to remove justices from the Supreme Court in order to give President Bush more opportunities to put conservatives on the court. He received an email question on the 700 Club asking, why didn't God punish the justices who voted in favor of abortion rights in that landmark abortion decision, Roe versus Wade? And here's what Robertson had to say. Prepare yourselves.
Okay, Pat, this is from Eugene, who says, excuse me, my wife and I are lifelong 700 Club members. We often hear how the Republicans are so against abortion and Democrats are so pro-choice. But this was not the case on the Roe v. Wade decision. 3 Nixon appointees, Blackmun, Powell, Berger, and 2 Eisenhower appointees, Brennan and Stewart, comprised a Republican majority, even without the 2 Democrats, Marshall and Douglas, voting. Why are these men not called out for the genocide against the unborn? Why did they all live to be such an old age after committing such a despicable act that has brought a curse upon the land? Please set the record straight.
Well, you'll have to ask God why he didn't kill them. I'm not in charge of the death or life of the Supreme Court judges, so it's in God's hands whether they live a long life. But that thing was called Blackmun's abortion, and Blackmun indeed was a Nixon appointee. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, Pat just doesn't know, Lewis, why God doesn't strike down individuals who make legal decisions. He just doesn't know why.
This is great. Pat Robertson has an answer for everything, right? But when he doesn't have an answer, he just says, well, ask God. But, you know, I thought God talks to Pat Robertson. Pat Robertson has like a personal relationship with God. So, yeah, I guess Pat doesn't have all the answers.
Maybe the answer is that the reason God doesn't individually kill Supreme Court justices when they make decisions that Pat Robertson believes are anti-biblical, maybe the explanation is that if God is real and is in charge of the entire universe, managing the minutia of smiting individuals on one court, in one country, on one continent, on one planet, in one solar system, within one galaxy of the entire universe, is a little bit too micro, even for the all-powerful God.
Well, I think Pat Robertson would say, or some of his listeners might say that, well, this is the only planet with life. We are still maybe not the center of the solar system, but the center of the universe. And, everything takes place here. So, yes, God is determining the outcome of football games and deciding which individuals die.
Is it possible that God is okay with abortion, or maybe that God isn't real? You'd think that Pat Robertson would at least consider that possibility when asked, hey, you say abortion is just so anti-God and anti-everything God wants, and I just don't understand why God didn't kill those Supreme Court justices. Maybe God's not against abortion, or maybe God just isn't real.
Oh, I don't think asking if God is real or not will get you very far with Pat Robertson, but perhaps you could enter a discussion with him about whether or not God is okay with abortion. I mean, maybe some people could interpret it that way.
The scariest part of all of this for me, Lewis, is that the person who emailed Pat Robertson asking that question, assuming that it was an honest question, probably votes.
Probably. It seems like a satirical question, but you're right. It's probably a real question from a voter, and it's terrifying.
I don't know that I've ever heard a question on the Pat Robertson show, the 700 Club, that didn't sound like a satirical question. But as we know, a lot of times these right-wing questions are indistinguishable from satire.
That's true. Yes, there are really highlights how many whack jobs are out there and how many people live under rocks.
NASA has discovered an Earth-like planet in our own galaxy. This is something that took place as a result of the planet hunting mission, the Kepler Space Telescope. The planet is called Kepler 452b. It's the smallest exoplanet discovered to date, orbiting in a habitable zone of a class G2 star, just like the Earth and Sun. This planet is 60% wider than Earth and probably about 5 times more massive. That means that its surface gravity is much stronger than on Earth. It is likely very rocky. Its year is 385 days to orbit the sun. It's about 5% longer than an Earth year. The planet is also 5% farther from its parent star, Kepler 452, than Earth is from the sun. It is 1,400 light years away in the constellation Cygnus. Now, to give you some context, Lewis, this planet, Kepler 452b, is 1,400 light years away. Pluto is 4 light hours away, and it took us almost 10 years to get to Pluto, setting speed records, mind you. Remember that light hours and light years are distances, not amounts of time. It's the amount of time it takes light to travel an hour, or the amount of time it takes light to travel a year, or rather the distance that it takes light to travel an hour, or that it takes light to travel a year. I almost misstated it there, but I want clarity this evening, Lewis.
Thank you. Thank you for clarity. Yes, this is interesting. We're always hearing about some type of planet that might be Earth-like. And like you were saying, yes, it took almost 10 years to get to Pluto. So how long would it take us to get to this planet?
Inconceivable with current technology.
That's true. And so while it's interesting to discover planets like this, I don't know why people are going crazy about this. We have no way of getting to it. I don't think we could live on it due to its size, due to its mass.
Let me address that. Okay. So it is true that we would feel twice as heavy on this planet because of the higher gravity than we do on Earth, but it would be possible. It would take a couple of generations or maybe a little more to adjust to it, but the idea was firefighters routinely carry pretty significant loads on their backs, and that can mimic temporarily the impact of increased surface gravity, and that apparently 2 times surface gravity is doable for humans, although there would be an adjustment period.
Yes. Well, I don't think we've tested this, and I don't think we have many ways to. So, wearing that equipment for an hour is quite different from living on this planet and giving birth on it. I think that we need a lot of testing.
Yeah, a NASA official says that he suspects over time humans could adapt to the higher gravity, maybe becoming stockier over a period of many generations. And the sunlight would feel a little bit different because of the slight different distance from their star, but that it would still seem quite similar to that on Earth, that photosynthesis would be possible, which is a really big issue when we talk about other planets and whether they could sustain life. So this is very, very interesting. But as Lewis says, by modern technology, does not seem possible we would be able to go to this planet anytime soon, but fascinating to hear about.
It's still interesting, and I see no reason why we shouldn't continue, looking for planets like this and advancing our knowledge.
Let's talk about our voicemail number. We have a voicemail number. It's available to you 24 hours a day, and the number is 219-2-DAVID-P, 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is one voicemail I got responding to some of my comments about my trip to Israel last week. Take a listen.
Hello, I'm glad you guys are back from vacation. It's good to have you back on the air. But I was just sitting here watching, and this is Brian from Michigan. And you were talking about being in Israel and how it's, for the first time being in the majority and what a feeling that was. I know this isn't apples for apples, but, as a gay man growing up in a really, really conservative area, the first time I went to Key West, I was just amazed. Everybody was open. People were holding hands. People were actually running commercials trying to get our business as a couple. And so, it was just such a freeing feeling. It was just such a wonderful feeling to be in an area where the majority of people were like you, or they wanted your business and they welcomed you.
Yeah, and it's interesting, it wasn't for me like a freeing feeling. It was just very, very different because ever since we were in kindergarten, Lewis, you very quickly find out that almost everybody celebrates Christmas and you don't. You find out that almost everybody is not Jewish and you are. And I didn't even really know it felt very weird to even exist in a situation when I was visiting Israel when that was not the case. And it really shed a lot of light on the allegations from Christians in the U.S. that they're being persecuted and discriminated against when they're the overwhelming majority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I was there, I kind of felt the same way. It was just, it was kind of a strange feeling. And, it's not really sure how to explain it other than that. It was just odd to be in a place where everybody was Jewish.
And by the way, lots of gay and lesbian couples walking around in Israel, and it is just no big deal. Lots are my hotel, for example, had the Israeli flag, the way that many American hotels have an American flag. and the gay pride flag, just as a matter of completely normal course that's what they have. And that is also weird because there are not very many places in the Middle East where you would even be comfortable with anyone knowing that you're gay, never mind hotels as a matter of policy having a gay pride flag. And that was very, very different as well. The bonus show today is huge. The first female coach in the NFL. An American dentist kills a famous lion and has to go into hiding after the backlash. And a new type of computer memory. All of those stories and more on the bonus show. You should really sign up for the bonus show by becoming a member at davidpakman.com/membership. Otherwise, we will talk to you tomorrow afternoon.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.